The thundering hooves of the stolen stallion echoed across the dusty Arizona plains as Katherine Blackwood raced toward an uncertain future, leaving behind a burning homestead and 3 dead bounty hunters. The year was 1878, and the territory was as unforgiving as the men who hunted her. Katherine's golden hair whipped wildly behind her as she pushed the horse harder, knowing that more hunters would soon follow. She had been running for 2 years now, ever since that fateful night in Denver when she'd shot the man who'd murdered her father. The fact that he'd been a prominent businessman with powerful friends had turned her into a fugitive overnight. The relentless sun beat down as she spotted a small settlement in the distance. Sweetwater Creek was barely a town, just a collection of weathered buildings fighting against the elements and time itself. Katherine slowed her horse to a trot. She needed supplies, maybe a new mount, and definitely a place to hide until nightfall. The main street was quiet in the afternoon heat. A saloon, general store, blacksmith, and a handful of other establishments lined the dirt road. Katherine kept her hat pulled low, concealing her face as she dismounted in front of the livery stable. "Fine animal," a deep voice commented from the shadows of the stable. "Bit overridden, though." Katherine's hand instinctively moved to the revolver hidden beneath her duster. "Just need him looked after. Water, feed, and rest." A tall man stepped into the light, wiping his hands on a rag. Dust and sweat clung to his tanned skin, and his dark hair fell just above piercing blue eyes that studied her with unnerving intensity. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the stubble that shadowed his face. "Vincent Harlow," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I run this stable." "Kate," she replied, offering only her first name and ignoring his outstretched hand. "How much for the care and boarding?" A flicker of amusement crossed his face as he lowered his hand. "2 bits for the day. $1 if you want him properly tended to. Looks like he could use it." Katherine pulled a silver dollar from her pocket and tossed it to him. "I'll be back before sundown." Vincent caught the coin with ease. As he moved to take the reins, his eyes drifted to the horse's flank, where a distinctive brand marked the animal. His expression hardened slightly. "This is a Triple R horse," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Ryan Rogers stock. Don't see many of his horses this far south without his men riding them." Katherine felt her heartbeat quicken. "I bought him fair from a trader in Tucson." "Must have been quite a trader," Vincent remarked, his eyes never leaving hers. "Rogers doesn't sell to traders. Ever." "Are you calling me a liar, Mr. Harlow?" Katherine's hand drifted back toward her weapon. Vincent raised his hands slightly. "Not my business how folks come by their property, madam. Just making conversation." A tense silence hung between them before Vincent turned to lead the horse into the stable. "I'll have him ready whenever you return. Might want to visit the general store if you're planning on traveling soon. Storm coming in from the north." Katherine watched him disappear into the shadows of the barn, her instincts screaming at her to leave immediately. But exhaustion and hunger overruled caution. She needed rest, and the stallion wouldn't make it much further without the same. The general store was mercifully empty except for an elderly shopkeeper who barely glanced up from his newspaper. Katherine purchased jerky, coffee, ammunition, and a new canteen, paying with carefully counted coins. She asked about lodging and was directed to a small boarding house at the edge of town. Mrs. Peterson, the boarding house proprietor, was a plump, chatty woman who seemed delighted to have a guest. "Not many women travelers come through Sweetwater," she remarked as she showed Katherine to a small but clean room. "Especially ones traveling alone." "I'm visiting my aunt in Prescott," Katherine lied smoothly. "Got separated from my escort when our stagecoach was robbed. Managed to buy a horse and make my way here." The woman clucked sympathetically. "Terrible business, those highway robberies. You're lucky to be alive, dear." The bathhouse is out back if you'd like to refresh yourself. Dinner's at 6. Katherine thanked her and locked the door once Mrs. Peterson had gone. She leaned against it, exhaling slowly, allowing herself a moment of relief. She set her saddlebags on the bed and removed her hat, releasing her golden hair from its confines. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a face that had grown harder over the years, once soft features now sharpened by hardship and vigilance. After washing away the trail dust as best she could with the basin of water provided, Katherine decided to risk a trip to the saloon. Information was as valuable as ammunition, and saloons were where news traveled fastest. She re-braided her hair, tucked it under her hat, and strapped her revolver to her hip, concealing it beneath her long duster. The Desert Rose Saloon was beginning to fill with the evening crowd when Katherine pushed through the batwing doors. She kept her head down and moved to a corner table with a clear view of both the entrance and the back door. A barmaid approached, and Katherine ordered whiskey, sliding a coin across the scarred wooden table. The barmaid returned with her drink. "Haven't seen you around before." "Just passing through," Katherine replied, taking a careful sip of the burning liquid. "Well, watch yourself. Some of the boys get rowdy after a few drinks." Katherine nodded her thanks. As the barmaid walked away, the batwing doors swung open again, and Vincent Harlow entered. He paused just inside the entrance, his eyes scanning the room until they found her in the corner. Something like resignation crossed his features before he moved to the bar. Katherine watched as he exchanged words with the bartender, occasionally glancing in her direction. After receiving a glass of amber liquid, Vincent made his way through the growing crowd to her table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, not waiting for a response before sitting across from her. "Free country," Katherine muttered, though her posture stiffened. Vincent took a slow sip of his drink. "You should know that 3 men rode into town about an hour ago. They're asking questions about a blonde woman on a triple-R horse." Katherine's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "Lots of blonde women in the territory. Not many riding Roger's prize stallion." Vincent leaned forward slightly. "They're staying at the saloon upstairs, planning to start a proper search at first light." "Why are you telling me this?" Katherine's voice was barely above a whisper, her fingers tightening around her glass. Vincent's blue eyes held hers. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted." Before Katherine could respond, the saloon doors burst open, and 3 dust-covered men entered. Their eyes swept across the room, predatory and determined. Katherine recognized them immediately as Ryan Rogers' men, the same brand of hired guns, who'd been tracking her since she'd stolen the stallion from their camp 2 weeks earlier. "Time to go," Vincent said quietly. "There's a back door behind the bar. Use it." Katherine hesitated, suspicion warring with necessity. "Why help me? You don't know me." Something dark flashed across Vincent's face. "Let's just say I've got no love for Rogers or his men. Now go. I'll create a distraction." Katherine slipped from her chair as Vincent stood and deliberately bumped into a large, drunken cowboy, spilling his drink. The resulting commotion gave her just enough cover to duck behind the bar and through the back door into the alley. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding as she considered her options. The boarding house was too obvious. She needed her horse and supplies, but the livery stable would be one of the first places Roger's men would check. "This way," Vincent's voice startled her as he appeared at the end of the alley. "They're occupied for now, but it won't last long." "How did you—" "No time," he cut her off. "Your horse is saddled and waiting behind my place. Follow me and stay low." Against her better judgment, Katherine followed him through the darkening streets, keeping to the shadows. They moved swiftly until they reached a small cabin on the outskirts of town. True to his word, her stallion was saddled and waiting, along with another horse, a sturdy bay gelding. "Why are you doing this?" Katherine demanded as Vincent checked the cinches on both horses. "Because I know Ryan Rogers," he replied grimly, "and I know what happens to those who cross him." He handed her the reins. "There's a line shack about 15 miles northwest of here. It's abandoned but solid. You'll be safe there for a few days." Katherine mounted the stallion, still wary. "And you? Won't they suspect you helped me?" Vincent swung onto his own horse. "Probably, which is why I'm coming with you." "I don't need a protector," Katherine said sharply. "No, but you need someone who knows this territory better than Roger's men do." Vincent turned his horse toward the open desert. "And maybe I've got my own reasons for wanting to disappear for a while." The sound of shouting drifted from the direction of the town. Katherine glanced back to see lanterns moving down the main street. "Decision time," Vincent said quietly. Katherine nodded tersely. "Lead the way." They rode hard through the night, the only sounds the drumming of hooves and the whisper of the desert wind. Katherine kept a wary eye on Vincent's back, her mind racing with questions. He could be leading her into a trap, yet something told her he was genuine in his desire to help her escape. The moon was high when they finally reached the line shack, a simple one-room structure nestled against a low ridge. Vincent dismounted and led both horses to a small corral partially hidden by scrub brush. "It's not much," he said as he pushed open the creaking door. "But it's defensible and hard to find unless you know it's here." Katherine remained on guard as she entered the shack. A table, 2 chairs, a small stove, and a narrow cot were the only furnishings. Dust covered everything, but the roof appeared sound. "Who owns this place?" she asked, running a finger along the table's surface. "Used to belong to the Rocking W Ranch," Vincent replied as he lit a lantern. "The old man died, and his son sold the land to Rogers. This place was forgotten in the sale." "How convenient that you know about it," Katherine remarked dryly. Vincent's mouth curved in a humorless smile. "I worked for the Rocking W before Rogers took over. Used this place during roundups." He set his saddlebags on the table. "You should get some rest. I'll take first watch." Katherine shook her head. "I don't sleep when strangers are around." "Suit yourself." Vincent shrugged and moved to the doorway, leaning against the frame as he surveyed the darkness. "But Roger's men won't find us tonight. We took a route they won't think to follow." Katherine remained standing, her hand never far from her revolver. "You seem to know a lot about Rogers and his men." Vincent was silent for a long moment. "I used to ride with them." The confession hung in the air between them. Katherine's grip tightened on her weapon. "Relax," Vincent said without turning. "If I wanted to take you back to Rogers, I would have done it in town." "Why did you leave his employ?" Katherine asked, needing to understand the man who had potentially saved her life. Vincent's shoulders tensed slightly. "Let's just say we had a difference of opinion about how to treat people who couldn't fight back. And now you're a stable keeper in a backwater town. And you're a woman running from bounty hunters," he countered. "We all have our stories." Katherine couldn't argue with that. She moved to the small window, keeping her distance from Vincent as she peered out at the moonlit desert. "What happens when they track us here?" "They won't," Vincent said with quiet confidence. "Not if we're smart. We'll rest for a day, then move on. I know places they'd never think to look." "We?" Katherine raised an eyebrow. "I work alone, Mr. Harlow." Vincent finally turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the lantern light. "Rogers doesn't give up on what he considers his property, whether it's a horse or a grudge. You stole his prized stallion, he'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." "I've managed so far," Katherine replied stiffly. "And how long have you been running? How many close calls? How many nights without proper sleep?" When she didn't answer, He continued softly, "Everyone needs help sometimes, even stubborn fugitives." Katherine bristled at his assessment but couldn't deny the truth in his words. She was exhausted, both physically and mentally, from the constant vigilance, the endless running. "One day," she conceded reluctantly. "We rest for one day, then I continue alone." Vincent nodded, though something in his expression suggested he didn't believe her. "There's jerky and coffee in my saddlebags. You should eat something." The night passed slowly. True to her word, Katherine didn't sleep, though exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. Vincent maintained his position by the door, occasionally stepping outside to check the surroundings. Neither spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts and suspicions. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light stretching across the desert floor. Vincent finally moved from his post, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness. "I'm going to check the horses and scout the area," he said. "Will you shoot me if I step outside?" A reluctant smile tugged at Katherine's lips. "Not unless you give me reason to." Vincent returned the smile, a brief warming of his usually guarded expression, before slipping out the door. Katherine moved to the window, watching as he tended to the horses. There was something in his manner, with the animals a gentleness that contrasted with his hardened exterior, that made her want to trust him despite her better judgment. When he returned, he carried a small desert hare. "Thought we could use fresh meat," he explained, pulling a knife from his boot. Katherine watched as he expertly cleaned and prepared the animal. "You're good at that." "Spent a lot of time living off the land," Vincent replied without looking up. "You build a fire in that stove, and I'll have this ready to cook in no time." They worked in a surprisingly comfortable silence, Katherine sweeping years of dust from the stove and lighting a small fire with kindling Vincent had gathered. The scent of cooking meat soon filled the small shack, making Katherine's stomach growl audibly. Vincent grinned at the sound. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" "Depends on your definition of proper," Katherine replied, accepting a portion of the cooked rabbit. "Thank you." They ate in silence, the food disappearing quickly. After washing it down with lukewarm coffee, Katherine felt some of her tension ease, though she remained vigilant. "You still haven't told me your real name," Vincent said as he cleaned his knife on a scrap of cloth. Katherine hesitated. Katherine Blackwood." Vincent nodded slowly. "The Katherine Blackwood who shot James Hollister in Denver 2 years ago?" Her hand immediately went to her gun. "How do you know about that?" Vincent raised his hands placatingly. "News travels even to backwater towns. Hollister was a powerful man with powerful friends. They've had a bounty on your head for a long time." "He murdered my father," Katherine said, her voice hard. "Shot him in the back over a business dispute, then bribed the judge to rule it self-defense. I merely balanced the scales of justice." "I'm not judging you," Vincent assured her. "God knows I've done things I'm not proud of. We all have our reasons." Katherine studied him, trying to reconcile the man before her with the outlaw he claimed to have been. "What's your story, Vincent Harlow? What drove you to ride with a man like Ryan Rogers and then turn against him?" Vincent's expression darkened. "It's not a pretty tale. Few of ours are," Katherine replied softly. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I was young and angry when I joined Rogers' crew. My family lost everything in the war, our farm in Virginia, my father, 2 brothers. We came west for a fresh start, but my mother died of fever the first winter." His eyes grew distant with memory. "I was 17, alone, and Rogers offered good money for men willing to do what needed doing." "And what needed doing?" Katherine prompted when he fell silent. "At first, it was just regular ranch work, breaking horses, driving cattle. But Rogers is a man who always wants more. He started buying up smaller ranches, forcing out those who wouldn't sell. and those who resisted. Vincent's jaw tightened. Let's just say I became very good at convincing people it was in their best interest to take Roger's offers. You were an enforcer, Katherine surmised. Vincent nodded, shame evident in his posture. For 5 years, until the Mendez family. He fell silent again, staring into his coffee cup as if it held the absolution he sought. What happened? Katherine asked quietly. They had a small ranch, good water rights. Rogers wanted it, but old man Mendez refused to sell. Rogers sent me and 2 others to persuade him. Vincent's voice had grown hoarse. Mendez still refused. Things got out of hand. The other men, they burned the house with the family inside. The mother and 2 children died in the fire. Katherine's eyes widened in horror. And you? I got the father and oldest daughter out, Vincent said, his eyes haunted. But I was too late for the others. That night, I took what money I had, grabbed my gear, and rode out. Been running from Rogers and my own conscience ever since. The confession hung heavily in the air between them. Katherine found herself believing him, recognizing the genuine remorse in his voice and eyes. How long ago was that? She asked. 3 years, Vincent replied. I drifted for a while, took odd jobs. Ended up in Sweetwater about a year ago when the previous stable owner decided to move on. It was quiet, out of the way. Thought Rogers might have forgotten about me. His mouth twisted wryly. Apparently not. So we're both running from our pasts, Katherine observed. Vincent met her gaze steadily. Difference is, you were seeking justice. I was just a hired gun who found his conscience too late. We can't change what's behind us, Katherine said after a moment. Only what's ahead. Wise words from someone so young, Vincent remarked with a small smile. Katherine bristled slightly. I'm 26, hardly a child. My apologies, Vincent said, the smile lingering. Life on the run tends to age a person beyond their years. I should know I'm only 30 myself. A companionable silence fell between them. Katherine felt an unexpected connection to this man with his troubled past and haunted eyes. For the first time in years, she had met someone who might truly understand the burden she carried. The day passed slowly. They took turns resting and watching for signs of pursuit, though Vincent assured her they were well hidden. As evening approached, Katherine found herself reluctantly admitting that she had benefited from the respite. We should leave at first light, Vincent said as he returned from checking the horses once more. Head north toward the high country. Roger's men don't know those trails like I do. Katherine nodded, having already decided to accept his guidance for a while longer. How far to the territorial border? 3 days hard ride, maybe 4, Vincent replied. But crossing into Colorado won't stop Rogers. His reach is long. I wasn't planning to stop in Colorado, Katherine said. I've heard Montana Territory is beautiful this time of year. Vincent studied her thoughtfully. That's a long way to go alone. Katherine shrugged, avoiding his gaze. I'm used to being alone. Doesn't mean you have to be, Vincent said quietly. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. Katherine busied herself with checking her revolver, a task she had already performed twice that day. Night fell, bringing with it a chill that seeped through the walls of the old line shack. Vincent built up the fire in the small stove, careful to keep it low enough that the smoke wouldn't be visible from a distance. You should take the cot, he said, spreading his bedroll on the floor near the door. Get some proper rest. I'll keep watch. Katherine hesitated. Despite the growing trust between them, old habits died hard. We could take shifts. Vincent shook his head. You're exhausted, Katherine. I can see it in your eyes. A few hours of deep sleep will do you more good than fitful dozing. I'll wake you if there's any trouble. Too tired to argue further, Katherine removed only her boots and duster before stretching out on the narrow cot. The thin mattress felt luxurious after weeks of sleeping on the ground. Despite her intention to remain alert, exhaustion quickly overcame her vigilance, and she drifted into sleep. Her dreams were chaotic flashes of her father's bloodied body, the crack of her pistol as she shot James Hollister, endless miles of desert with faceless pursuers always just behind her. Then suddenly, blue eyes and a gentle voice telling her she was safe. Katherine woke with a start, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness. The shack was quiet except for the soft crackling of the stove. Vincent sat by the door, his silhouette outlined against the faint light of the dying fire. "Everything's quiet," he said softly, sensing her wakefulness. "No signs of anyone nearby." Katherine sat up, surprised to find a blanket covering her that hadn't been there when she'd fallen asleep. "How long was I out?" "About 6 hours," Vincent replied. "You needed it." "You should have woken me for my shift," she chided, though there was no real anger in her voice. Vincent shrugged. "I've gone longer without sleep. Besides, you looked peaceful. Didn't want to disturb that." Something in his tone made Katherine's cheeks warm slightly. She busied herself pulling on her boots to hide her reaction. "We should get moving if we want to make good distance today." They packed quickly and efficiently, leaving little trace of their presence. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, they saddled the horses and prepared to leave. "Where exactly are we heading?" Katherine asked as she mounted the triple R stallion. "There's a network of old mining trails in the mountains to the north," Vincent replied, swinging into his saddle. "Abandoned now, but still passable if you know the way. Roger's men would never think to look there." "And you know these trails?" Vincent nodded. "Spent some time prospecting after I left Roger's employ. Never found gold, but I found something more valuable places to disappear." They rode out as the sun crested the horizon, keeping to low ground and using the terrain to conceal their passage whenever possible. Vincent led them on a circuitous route, sometimes doubling back or crossing rocky ground where they would leave no tracks. By midday, the desert landscape had given way to more rugged terrain. Scrubby pine trees dotted the slopes, and the air grew cooler as they climbed. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat a quick meal of jerky and hardtack. "How did you end up in Denver?" Vincent asked as they sat in the shade of a large boulder. "You don't strike me as someone who was born to city life." Katherine smiled faintly. "I wasn't. I grew up on a small ranch in western Kansas. My mother died when I was young, so it was just my father and me. He taught me everything: how to ride, shoot, run the ranch." Her expression softened with memory. "After the war, things got hard. Drought, cattle disease, raids from desperate men. When I was 20, Father decided to sell the ranch and try his luck in Denver." "What did he do there?" "He was a fine woodworker," Katherine replied. "Opened a small shop making furniture. Built a good reputation quickly." Her expression darkened. "Too good, apparently. James Hollister wanted to buy him out, expand his own business interests. When Father refused, Hollister had him killed." Vincent nodded slowly. "And afterward?" "After you shot Hollister, I ran," Katherine said simply. "His business partners put a bounty on my head. $5,000 dead or alive. I've been moving ever since, taking odd jobs where I could find them, never staying in one place too long." "That's a hard life for anyone," Vincent observed, "especially a woman alone." Katherine's chin lifted slightly. "I manage." "I've no doubt of that," Vincent said with a hint of admiration. "Still, 2 years on the run takes its toll." "Says the man who's been running for 3, Katherine countered with a small smile. Vincent chuckled. "Touché." He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. We should keep moving. I want to reach Highland Pass before dark. They mounted and continued north, the terrain growing increasingly challenging. Vincent navigated confidently, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of knowledge about the territory. Despite her usual wariness, Katherine found herself enjoying his company and conversation. Late afternoon brought them to a narrow trail winding between steep rock faces. Vincent held up a hand, signaling Katherine to stop. "What is it?" she asked, her hand moving instinctively to her revolver. Vincent dismounted, studying the ground carefully. Tracks. Recent. For maybe 5 horses. Katherine's heart raced. Roger's men. "Can't be sure," Vincent replied, his expression grim. "But they're heading the same way we are." "Could be prospectors," Katherine suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Vincent shook his head. "No mining equipment. And look here," he pointed to marks in the dust. "Spurs. Riding boots. Not work boots." "What do we do?" Katherine asked, scanning the surrounding terrain for alternatives. Vincent remounted, his face set with determination. "We find another way. There's an old Apache trail that branches off about a mile back. It's steeper, more dangerous, but it'll take us where we need to go." The Apache trail proved to be everything Vincent had warned: a narrow, treacherous path that clung to the mountainside, often with sheer drops just inches from the horses' hooves. They dismounted and led their mounts through the most precarious sections, the animals snorting nervously at the unfamiliar terrain. Twilight was deepening into night when they finally emerged onto a small plateau. A cluster of abandoned mining buildings stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Highland Camp," Vincent announced, leading them toward the largest structure. Was a silver mine back in the 60s. Played out quickly. Most folks don't even remember it's here. The main building had once been a combination bunkhouse and office. Its roof was partially collapsed, but one end remained relatively intact. Vincent led the horses to a lean-to at the side of the building while Katherine cautiously explored the interior. "It's sturdier than it looks," Vincent said as he joined her, carrying their saddlebags. "I've stayed here a few times. That corner is dry, and the chimney still draws if we want a small fire." They settled in for the night, risking a tiny blaze in the old stone fireplace. The dancing flames cast long shadows on the walls as they shared a meager supper of the last of Vincent's jerky and coffee. "We'll need to hunt tomorrow," Vincent observed, "or find a stream for fishing. We're running low on supplies." Katherine nodded, her mind elsewhere. "Do you think those riders were looking for us specifically, or just patrolling?" "Hard to say," Vincent replied thoughtfully. "Rogers controls most of the territory south of here. Could be his regular men checking boundaries. Or they could have tracked us from Sweetwater," Katherine suggested grimly. Vincent met her worried gaze. "If they had, they'd have been closer behind us. No, I think we've got some breathing room, but we should still move at first light." They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in thought. Katherine found herself studying Vincent's profile in the firelight: the strong jaw, the scar that hinted at past violence, the weariness around his eyes that spoke of a man who had seen too much. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "When this is over?" Vincent looked up, surprised by the question. "When what's over?" "This. Running." Katherine gestured vaguely. "If Rogers ever stops looking for you." A sad smile touched Vincent's lips. "That's a big if. Men like Ryan Rogers don't forgive or forget." "Humor me," Katherine insisted softly. "If you could do anything, go anywhere, what would you choose?" Vincent was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I'd head north," he finally said. "Montana, maybe, or Wyoming. Find a small piece of land near the mountains. Raise horses. His voice grew quieter. Start fresh where no one knows my name or what I've done. That sounds nice, Katherine murmured. What about you? Vincent asked. What would Katherine Blackwood do if she weren't a fugitive? Katherine hugged her knees to her chest, allowing herself to imagine such a possibility. Something similar, I suppose. A small ranch somewhere beautiful and remote. A garden. Maybe some chickens. She smiled wistfully. A life where I don't have to look over my shoulder every minute. Sounds like we want similar things, Vincent observed, his blue eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Simple things, Katherine agreed. Peace. Safety. A home, Vincent added softly. The word hung between them, laden with all it represented: permanence, belonging, an end to running. Katherine felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. We should get some rest, she said, breaking the moment before emotion overcame her. Long ride tomorrow. Vincent nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll take first watch. This time Katherine didn't argue. She spread her bedroll in the corner Vincent had indicated and lay down, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she replayed their conversation in her mind. For the first time in years, she had allowed herself to voice hopes for a future beyond mere survival. More unsettling was the realization that in her mind's eye, the ranch she had described no longer appeared as a solitary refuge. Unbidden, she had imagined Vincent there with his horses, his quiet strength a comforting presence. Katherine turned on her side, facing the wall to hide her confused expression from Vincent's perceptive gaze. She had survived this long by relying only on herself, by keeping everyone at a distance. Emotional attachments were dangerous. They clouded judgment and created vulnerabilities. Yet as she finally drifted towards sleep, Katherine couldn't deny the simple truth. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Dawn came with a heavy mist clinging to the mountainside, reducing visibility to mere yards. Vincent, who had eventually traded watch duties with Katherine in the early morning hours, studied the white blanket with a mixture of concern and calculation. Good news and bad news, he announced as Katherine joined him at the doorway. The mist will hide our movements, but it also makes the trails treacherous. And if Roger's men are out there, we won't see them until they're upon us, Katherine added, voicing Vincent's unspoken concern. He nodded grimly. We have two choices: wait for the mist to burn off, which could take hours, or move carefully while we have natural cover. Katherine considered the options. I've never been one to sit and wait for trouble to find me. Let's use the cover while we have it. They packed quickly and led their horses from the shelter. The animals' breath formed small clouds in the cool mountain air as they picked their way carefully along a faint trail leading higher into the mountains. The mist created an otherworldly atmosphere, muffling sounds and transforming familiar shapes into ghostly silhouettes. They moved slowly, Vincent leading with one hand on his horse's bridle and the other often outstretched to feel for obstacles. There's a high meadow about 3 miles ahead, Vincent explained in hushed tones. Good water, good hunting. We can resupply there before continuing north. They had traveled perhaps a mile when Vincent suddenly froze, raising a hand in warning. Katherine stopped immediately, straining her ears. At first, she heard nothing but the soft breathing of their horses and the occasional drip of moisture from the trees. Then she caught it, the distant sound of voices, carried eerily through the mist. Vincent motioned her off the trail, and they led their horses into a dense stand of pines, moving as quietly as possible over the needle-covered ground. They had barely concealed themselves when the voices grew clearer. Katherine tensed as she made out words. Waste of time in this damned fog, a gruff voice complained. Could ride right past them and never know it. Boss says they came this way, another voice replied. That old Apache at the trading post saw a man and woman matching their description heading north 2 days ago. Harlow's a fool if he thinks he can hide in his old haunts, the first voice said with a harsh laugh. Rogers knows every hole he ever crawled into. Katherine glanced at Vincent, whose face had hardened into an expressionless mask. His hand rested on his revolver as the voices drew nearer, now accompanied by the muffled sounds of horses moving slowly along the trail. 4 riders materialized through the mist, heavily armed men with hard faces and watchful eyes. They passed within 20 feet of Katherine and Vincent's hiding place, so close that Katherine could see the Rogers brand on their horses' flanks. She held her breath until they disappeared into the white wall of fog, their voices gradually fading. "They're heading straight for Highland Camp," Vincent whispered once the men were well past. "Won't take them long to realize we've already moved on." "We need to change direction," Katherine suggested. "They're expecting us to continue north." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "There's a ravine about half a mile east. Difficult passage, but it leads to a valley that eventually connects with the western trails. Might buy us some time." They waited several more minutes to ensure the men were truly gone before carefully leading their horses back to the trail, and then east toward the ravine Vincent had mentioned. The mist began to thin as the morning advanced, revealing glimpses of blue sky above. The ravine proved to be a steep, rock-strewn gully that descended sharply between towering cliffs. They were forced to dismount and lead the horses single file down a precarious path that often seemed to disappear entirely. "Watch that loose shale," Vincent warned as Katherine's foot dislodged a small cascade of rocks. "One bad slide could bring the whole slope down." They had nearly reached the bottom when a gunshot echoed through the ravine, the sound bouncing off the stone walls in a confusing reverberation. A bullet struck the rock near Vincent's head, sending fragments flying. "Down!" he shouted, drawing his revolver as he sought cover behind a large boulder. Katherine didn't need to be told twice. She ducked behind a fallen tree, pulling her nervous horse with her as she drew her own weapon. More shots followed, kicking up dust where they struck. "I count 2 shooters," Vincent called to her. "Top of the ravine, north side." Katherine risked a quick look and spotted movement on the ridge above them. "Rogers' men." "Has to be," Vincent replied grimly. "They must have split up to cover more ground." Another volley of shots pinned them down. The horses snorted and stamped nervously, making them vulnerable targets. "We can't stay here," Katherine said, her mind racing. "We're too exposed." Vincent nodded, scanning the terrain. "There's a cutback in the cliff face about 50 yards ahead. Might provide better cover. I'll draw their fire, you make for it with the horses." "That's suicide," Katherine objected. "They'll have a clear shot at you." "I'm faster than I look," Vincent replied with a tight smile. "On my signal, go. Don't stop for anything." Before Katherine could protest further, Vincent fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge, then sprinted from his position, zigzagging across open ground. The gunmen immediately redirected their fire toward him, bullets kicking up dust at his heels. Katherine seized the moment, leading both horses in a dash toward the cutback Vincent had indicated. She heard the continued exchange of gunfire behind her, but didn't dare look back, focusing instead on reaching the shelter of the recessed cliff. She had almost made it when a cry of pain reached her ears. Turning, she saw Vincent stumble, his left arm clutching his right shoulder as he continued running in a crouch. "Vincent!" she called, securing the horses before rushing back toward him. "Get back!" he shouted, but Katherine ignored him, drawing her revolver and firing several shots toward the ridge to provide covering fire. She reached Vincent just as his legs seemed to give out. Slinging his uninjured arm over her shoulders, she helped him toward the cutback, bullets still striking around them. "Foolish woman," Vincent gasped as they finally reached the relative safety of the recessed cliff. Could have gotten yourself killed. You're welcome, Katherine replied tersely, helping him sit with his back against the rock wall. How bad is it? Vincent winced as she carefully pulled his hand away from the wound. Blood had soaked through his shirt, but the flow seemed relatively controlled. Bullet went clean through, he said through gritted teeth. Hurts like hell, but I'll live. Katherine tore a strip from her spare shirt and fashioned a makeshift bandage, wrapping it tightly around Vincent's shoulder to stanch the bleeding. Above them, the gunfire had ceased, but she could hear voices calling to each other. They're coming down, she said, checking her revolver. 4 shots left. Vincent drew his own weapon with his left hand. I've got 5. Make them count. They waited in tense silence as the sounds of men picking their way down the ravine grew closer. Katherine positioned herself at the edge of their shelter, ready to fire at the first target that presented itself. The minutes stretched agonizingly until a voice called out, "Harlow, we know you're down there. Rogers wants a word with you." Vincent exchanged a glance with Katherine. "Dawson," he murmured. "Rogers' foreman. Come out now and maybe the woman lives." The voice continued. "Keep hiding, and we'll bring both your corpses back to the boss." "Generous offer, Dawson," Vincent called back, his voice remarkably steady despite his injury. "But I think we'll take our chances." A harsh laugh echoed through the ravine. "Always were a stubborn fool, Harlow. Rogers is offering 5,000 for you now, same as the bounty on the Blackwood woman. 10,000 total. Makes you 2 mighty tempting targets." Katherine's blood ran cold at the mention of her name. They knew exactly who she was. "They're trying to keep us talking while they position themselves," Vincent whispered. "Watch for movement on both sides." No sooner had he spoken than a shadow appeared at the edge of their shelter. Katherine fired without hesitation, her bullet finding its mark with a solid thud and a cry of pain. Return fire immediately peppered their position, forcing them to press back against the cliff wall. Vincent fired twice toward the source of the shots, then hissed as the recoil jarred his injured shoulder. "One down, at least temporarily," he said through clenched teeth. The exchange of gunfire continued sporadically, neither side able to gain a clear advantage. Katherine knew their situation was deteriorating. They were outnumbered, Vincent was wounded, and their ammunition was limited. "We need a diversion," she said, eyeing the nervous horses still tethered nearby. Vincent followed her gaze and nodded in understanding. "The stallion is fast. If you can reach him—" "I wasn't suggesting I leave you behind," Katherine cut him off sharply. "Better one of us survives than neither," Vincent argued. "You have a chance on that horse." Katherine's jaw set stubbornly. "We go together or not at all." Before Vincent could respond, a new sound reached them, the thunder of approaching hooves, many more than the 4 Rogers men had brought. Gunshots erupted from above, but they weren't directed at Katherine and Vincent's position. "What the hell?" Vincent muttered, cautiously peering around the edge of their shelter. A group of riders had appeared at the top of the ravine, at least a dozen, firing down at Rogers' men, who were now caught in the open. The newcomers wore dusty range clothes, their faces obscured by bandanas, but their precise movements suggested military training. "Who are they?" Katherine asked, bewildered by this unexpected intervention. Vincent shook his head, equally confused. "Not Rogers' men, that's for certain." They watched as Rogers' men retreated under the heavy fire, abandoning their attack on Katherine and Vincent to seek cover of their own. Within minutes, several of the newcomers had made their way down the ravine, approaching Katherine and Vincent's position with weapons raised but not aimed directly at them. A tall man with piercing gray eyes above his bandana stepped forward. "Katherine Blackwood?" he asked, his voice carrying an educated Eastern accent. Katherine tensed, her finger tightening on the trigger of her revolver. Who's asking? The man slowly lowered his bandana, revealing a face marked by a neatly trimmed beard and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent years in the western sun. Marshal William Donnelly, Pinkerton Detective Agency. We've been looking for you, Miss Blackwood. Katherine's heart sank. After everything, to be captured by Pinkertons seemed a cruel twist of fate. If you're here to collect the bounty— I'm not here for any bounty, Donnelly interrupted. I'm here because we have evidence that James Hollister's death was justified. He glanced at Vincent, noting his wounded state. And it appears we arrived just in time. Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered to life in Katherine's chest. What evidence? Hollister's former clerk came forward 6 months ago with ledgers proving Hollister ordered the murder of your father and several other business rivals, Donnelly explained. The governor of Colorado has granted you a full pardon, Miss Blackwood. We've been trying to find you before the bounty hunters did. Katherine stared at him in disbelief, unable to process the sudden reversal of her fortunes. A pardon? I'm free. Donnelly nodded, a small smile softening his stern features. Free and clear. Though I must say, you've led us on quite a chase. Vincent shifted beside her, grimacing at the movement. And what about Roger's men? They'll still be hunting us. Donnelly turned his attention to Vincent. You must be Vincent Harlow. Yes, we're aware of your situation with Ryan Rogers as well. Vincent's expression grew wary. Are you here to arrest me too? No, Donnelly replied. Though I'd be interested in your testimony regarding certain activities of the Rogers Ranch. There's a federal investigation pending into land fraud and intimidation tactics. One of Donnelly's men approached. Sir, Rogers' men have retreated, but they're regrouping on the ridge to the west. We should move soon. Donnelly nodded. Can you ride, Harlow? We have a camp about 5 miles from here with medical supplies. Vincent struggled to his feet with Katherine's help. I'll manage. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving, Vincent on his own horse despite Katherine's concerns about his wound. Donnelly and his men surrounded them protectively as they left the ravine and headed west along a different trail than the one Rogers' men had taken. Katherine rode close to Vincent, watching him carefully for signs that his strength might be failing. Though pale from blood loss, he sat straight in the saddle, his jaw set with determination. How are you holding up? She asked quietly. Vincent managed a small smile. I've had worse. Just wondering if this is too good to be true. Katherine understood his skepticism. After years of running, the sudden promise of freedom seemed almost impossible to believe. Do you trust them? Pinkertons don't usually lie about official pardons, Vincent replied thoughtfully. And they did save our lives. True, Katherine conceded. I just can't quite believe it's over. Vincent's expression grew somber. It might be over for you. My situation with Rogers is complicated. Before Katherine could respond, Donnelly dropped back to ride alongside them. We'll reach our camp soon. We have a doctor with us who can tend to that shoulder properly, Harlow. Much appreciated, Marshal, Vincent replied. Though I'm curious why the Pinkertons would involve themselves in a private dispute between Rogers and me. Donnelly's eyes narrowed slightly. The Pinkerton agency goes where the evidence leads, Mr. Harlow. And in this case, it led to widespread corruption involving several territorial officials and Mr. Rogers. Your name came up in connection with the Mendez family incident. Vincent tensed visibly. I didn't. We know you tried to save them. Donnelly interrupted. The daughter, Maria Mendez, is alive and well in California. She provided a statement clearing you of involvement in the deaths of her mother and siblings. The news hit Vincent like a physical blow. Katherine saw the shock and then profound relief wash over his face. Maria's alive? I thought after I left her with the mission in Santa Fe I never knew what happened to her. She's married now. Has 2 children. Donnelly reached into his vest and withdrew a folded paper, which he handed to Vincent. She asked me to give you this if we found you. Vincent took the letter with trembling fingers, tucking it carefully inside his shirt. Katherine could see the emotion he was struggling to contain and felt her own eyes grow moist at witnessing this unexpected redemption. The Pinkerton camp was well established in a hidden valley, with several tents arranged around a central fire. As promised, a doctor immediately attended to Vincent's wound, cleaning and properly bandaging it after confirming that the bullet had indeed passed through cleanly without hitting bone or major blood vessels. Katherine hovered nearby during the treatment, only stepping away when Donnelly requested a private word with her. They walked to the edge of the camp, where the marshal explained in more detail the circumstances of her pardon. Hollister's partners tried to cover up his crimes even after his death, Donnelly told her. But his clerk, a man named Peterson, couldn't live with the guilt. He kept copies of incriminating documents, including orders for your father's murder. Why did it take so long? Katherine asked, still struggling to accept that her nightmare was truly ending. Powerful men protect their own, Donnelly replied grimly. It took time to build a case strong enough that even Hollister's political allies couldn't dismiss it. The governor issued your pardon 4 months ago. Katherine shook her head in wonder. All this time, I could have stopped running. You had no way of knowing, Donnelly said kindly. But you're free now, Miss Blackwood. Free to build whatever future you choose. The word future resonated deeply. For so long, Katherine had lived only in the present, focusing on survival rather than possibilities. Now, suddenly, possibilities stretched before her like an open road. Her thoughts immediately turned to Vincent. What would this mean for him? Would he continue running from Rogers? Or would the Pinkertons' investigation provide him the same freedom she had unexpectedly received? As if reading her thoughts, Donnelly added, Mr. Harlow's situation is more complex. We can offer him protection as a witness, but Rogers is a vindictive man with long reach. What will happen to Rogers? Katherine asked. If our investigation proceeds as expected, he'll face federal charges, Donnelly replied. But these cases take time, and men like Rogers don't always wait for justice through proper channels. The implication was clear: Vincent might still be in danger for some time. Katherine thanked the marshal and returned to the medical tent, where she found Vincent sitting on a cot, his upper body bare except for the fresh bandages around his shoulder. He was reading the letter from Maria Mendez, his expression a mixture of pain and profound relief. Good news? Katherine asked softly. Vincent looked up, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. She forgives me, he said simply. After everything that happened, she forgives me. Katherine sat beside him on the cot, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Sometimes forgiveness is the only way forward for both the forgiven and the forgiver. Vincent carefully refolds the letter. Donnelly says they want my testimony against Rogers. Will you give it? Yes, Vincent said without hesitation. It's time someone stood against him. He turned to face Katherine fully. But what about you? You're free now. Where will you go? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Katherine had been so focused on survival for so long that the concept of choice of a future dictated by desire rather than necessity felt almost overwhelming. I don't know, she admitted. I haven't allowed myself to think beyond the next day, the next town, for years. You mentioned Montana, Vincent reminded her gently. A small ranch, chickens. Katherine smiled at the memory of their fireside conversation. I did, didn't I? It seems like a dream now, one I might actually be able to reach. It's a good dream, Vincent said, his voice low and earnest. one worth pursuing. A question formed in Catherine's mind, one she had never expected to consider. What about your dream, Vincent? The horse ranch in the north. His eyes held hers steadily. Still seems like the right direction. The double meaning wasn't lost on Katherine. Heat crept into her cheeks as she realized how much she wanted their paths to continue together. In just a few days, this man had become more important to her than anyone had been in years. Donnelly says Rogers will still be a threat, she said carefully, even with the Pinkertons' investigation. Vincent nodded, his expression darkening slightly. Rogers doesn't forget or forgive. He'll hold a grudge until one of us is in the ground. Then perhaps it's safer not to face him alone, Katherine suggested, her heart pounding as she took this tentative step toward a shared future. Hope flickered in Vincent's eyes, quickly tempered by concern. Katherine, I can't ask you to tie your fate to mine. You've just gained your freedom, you shouldn't immediately risk it by associating with a marked man. You didn't ask, Katherine pointed out. And I've spent 2 years as a marked woman myself. I understand the risks better than most. Vincent reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in his. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through Katherine's body. Why would you consider such a thing? You barely know me. Katherine considered the question seriously. I know you risked your life to help a stranger. I know you tried to save the Mendes family when others would have stood by. I know you've been running from your past mistakes instead of repeating them. She squeezed his hand gently. Sometimes you learn more about a person in a few days of danger than in years of peaceful acquaintance. A small smile tugged at Vincent's lips. You make a compelling case, Miss Blackwood. Besides, Katherine added with a lightness she hadn't felt in years, 2 guns are better than 1 if Rogers' men come calling. Vincent's laugh was warm and genuine, transforming his usually serious face. True enough. His expression sobered slightly. But I need you to be certain. The life I can offer right now is uncertain at best. Katherine met his gaze steadily. You've got a past, she said softly, echoing the realization that had been growing in her heart since they'd first shared their stories. And I want a future. With you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Vincent's blue eyes widened slightly, then softened with emotion. His hand tightened around hers. I've spent 3 years believing I didn't deserve a future, he said, his voice rough with feeling. That the best I could hope for was to outrun my past long enough to die of old age instead of a bullet. And now, Katherine prompted gently. Vincent raised his free hand to brush a strand of golden hair from her face, his touch feather-light. Now I'm starting to believe in possibilities again. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Katherine found herself leaning closer, drawn by an irresistible force. Vincent hesitated, searching her eyes for confirmation, then closed the remaining distance. Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative, 2 people long accustomed to caution testing this new, fragile connection. Then Katherine's hand found Vincent's cheek, and the kiss deepened, becoming a promise, an affirmation of the future they both suddenly dared to imagine. When they finally drew apart, Katherine felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long had receded, replaced by a cautious hope. So, Vincent said, his voice husky, Montana? Katherine smiled, truly smiled, for what felt like the first time in years. Montana sounds perfect. The next few days passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Donnelly arranged for Katherine's official pardon documents to be delivered to the Pinkerton camp, and Vincent provided his formal testimony regarding Rogers' illegal activities, which was transcribed by Donnelly's clerk. The Pinkertons planned to remain in the area for another week, gathering additional evidence before returning to Denver. Donnelly offered Katherine and Vincent the protection of traveling with his group, but after careful consideration, they declined. Rogers will have men watching the main routes, Vincent explained. 2 people traveling alone will attract less attention than riding with a group of obvious lawmen. Donnelly reluctantly agreed with this assessment. Where will you head? Vincent and Katherine had discussed this at length. Northwest, Vincent answered. Through Utah Territory, then up to Montana. Routes Rogers' men are less likely to patrol. It's a long journey, Donnelly observed. Rough country. Katherine's hand found Vincent's, a gesture that had become natural in recent days. We've both traveled rough country before. Donnelly provided them with supplies, additional ammunition, and letters of introduction to Pinkerton offices along their planned route. If you need assistance, show these, he instructed, and send word when you settle somewhere. The agency may need additional testimony from both of you when Rogers' case comes to trial. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cool. Vincent's shoulder was healing well, though he still carried his arm in a sling to prevent reopening the wound. Katherine had spent the previous day servicing their weapons and checking their gear, ensuring everything was in order for the long journey ahead. As they prepared to mount up, Donnelly approached with a final piece of advice. Rogers has put out additional bounties on both of you, 10,000 each now. Word will spread. Be vigilant. Vincent nodded grimly. We will be. Katherine secured the last of their supplies to her saddle. The Triple R stallion had been replaced with a sturdy mountain horse provided by the Pinkertons, less conspicuous than the valuable animal that had inadvertently started their adventure. Ready? Vincent asked, mounting carefully to avoid jarring his injured shoulder. Katherine swung into her saddle with practiced ease. Ready. They rode out of the Pinkerton camp as the sun crested the eastern mountains, their path leading northwest toward the distant promise of Montana. The journey ahead would be long and likely dangerous, but for the first time in years, both rode toward something rather than away from it. They traveled steadily for the next 2 weeks, avoiding towns and established trails when possible. Vincent's knowledge of the territory proved invaluable as he guided them through little-known passes and hidden valleys. They hunted and fished for food, camped under the stars, and gradually settled into a comfortable routine together. Katherine discovered that Vincent had a dry sense of humor that emerged more frequently as the distance from Rogers' territory increased. Vincent found that Katherine had a remarkable talent for tracking and could spot game where he saw nothing. They complemented each other in ways neither had expected, their partnership strengthening with each passing day. Their evenings around the campfire became treasured moments, opportunities to learn more about each other, to share stories from their lives before they became fugitives. Katherine told Vincent about her childhood on the Kansas ranch, about her mother's love of music and her father's patient teaching. Vincent spoke of his family's farm in Virginia, of the war that had taken his father and brothers, of his mother's strength in the face of devastating loss. They also spoke of the future tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. They discussed what kind of land they would seek in Montana, what crops might grow well, how many horses Vincent might breed. Katherine described the garden she wanted to plant, the house she envisioned building. Simple dreams, perhaps, but precious for what they represented: hope, permanence, belonging. Their physical relationship developed gradually, each respecting the other's need for time. Tentative touches evolved into embraces, kisses deepened with growing passion, until one starlit night in a secluded mountain meadow, they came together as lovers for the first time. Afterward, Katherine lay in Vincent's arms, watching the countless stars overhead, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. I never expected this, she murmured, her head resting on his chest. When I ran from Denver, I thought my life was over, that all I could hope for was survival. Vincent's fingers traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. And now, Katherine raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. Now I believe in beginnings again. Their journey continued northward. They skirted the eastern edge of Utah Territory, passing through sparsely populated lands where news traveled slowly and strangers asked few questions. As they approached the Montana border, the landscape changed, becoming greener, more verdant, with rolling hills and countless streams fed by the distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed as they crested a rise overlooking a broad valley. Autumn had painted the landscape in vibrant golds and reds, with stands of evergreens providing dramatic contrast. Vincent nodded, his eyes scanning the valley with a surveyor's appreciation. Good water, sheltered from the worst winter winds, enough flat land for crops and grazing. Katherine glanced at him with raised eyebrows. "Are you suggesting this might be the place?" A slow smile spread across Vincent's face. "Might be worth investigating, don't you think?" They made their way down into the valley, following a clear stream that wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers. Near the valley's center, they discovered an abandoned homestead, little more than a rough cabin and the remains of a corral, long since deserted by whatever hopeful settler had originally built it. Vincent dismounted to examine the structure while Katherine circled the property. The cabin's roof had partially collapsed, but its log walls remained solid. The location was perfect, sheltered by trees on the north side, with clear views in other directions, the stream passing within 50 yards of the door. "What do you think happened to whoever built this place?" Katherine asked as she rejoined Vincent. He shrugged, running a hand along the weathered logs. "Hard to say. Maybe they gave up after a harsh winter. Maybe they found gold somewhere and moved on. The important thing is that they filed a claim." He pointed to a crude but official-looking marker near the cabin door. "This land belonged to someone once. Might be possible to acquire it legally without much trouble." Katherine's heart quickened. "You think we could claim it?" "The nearest town can't be more than a day's ride," Vincent reasoned. "We could inquire about land records, see if the claim has lapsed." The hope in his voice matched the feeling expanding in Katherine's chest. "Should we make camp here tonight? Get a feel for the place?" Vincent smiled, reaching for her hand. "I'd like that." They spent the afternoon clearing debris from the cabin floor and patching the worst holes in the roof with canvas from their supplies. Katherine found wild onions and berries near the stream while Vincent hunted, returning with a pair of rabbits for their evening meal. As twilight descended, they sat on a fallen log outside the cabin, watching the last light fade from the valley while enjoying their simple but satisfying dinner. "We could expand the cabin there," Vincent mused, gesturing toward the eastern wall. "Add a proper bedroom, maybe a workshop eventually." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, smiling at his enthusiasm. "The garden could go on that southern slope. Good drainage, plenty of sun. The corral needs to be completely rebuilt, but there's room for a small barn too," Vincent continued. "With enough work, this could be something special." "It already is something special," Katherine said softly. "It feels right, Vincent, like we were meant to find it." He turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "Katherine, I need to ask you something." She straightened, sensing the importance of the moment. "What is it?" Vincent took both her hands in his. "We've talked about building a life here together, making this our home, but I realize we've never spoken about what that truly means." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I want to do this properly. I want you as my wife, not just my partner in this venture." Katherine's breath caught. Despite the growing closeness between them, despite the intimacy they had shared, she hadn't allowed herself to imagine marriage, that most normal of institutions, as part of her future. "I know it's sudden," Vincent continued, misinterpreting her silence, "and I have nothing to offer but myself and whatever we can build together. If you need time, Katherine stopped his words with a kiss, pouring all her emotion into the connection between them. When she finally pulled back, tears glistened in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will be your wife." Relief and joy transformed Vincent's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Katherine Blackwood," he murmured against her hair. "I think I have since that first day in the stable when you stood your ground against me." Katherine laughed softly. "And I love you, Vincent Harlow, despite my best efforts not to get attached to anyone ever again." They spent the night in the partially repaired cabin, making plans for their future as they lay in each other's arms. The next morning, they rode to the nearest town, a small but growing settlement called Pine Creek. The town was typical of frontier communities, a main street lined with basic businesses, a church, a schoolhouse, and scattered residences. The land office was a small building near the center of town, manned by a bespectacled clerk who seemed surprised to have customers. "The Johnson claim?" he repeated after Vincent inquired about the abandoned homestead. "Let me check the records." He disappeared into a back room, returning several minutes later with a dusty ledger. "Johnson Albert. Filed claim in 71, abandoned in 73. Never proved up the land." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "Claims open for filing if you're interested." Vincent glanced at Katherine, who nodded encouragingly. "We are. What's the process?" The paperwork was surprisingly straightforward. Since the land had already been surveyed and registered, they needed only to file their intent to claim, pay a modest fee, and commit to making specified improvements within a certain time frame. "You'll need to build a permanent dwelling, cultivate at least 10 acres, and reside on the property for 5 years, the clerk explained. "After that, you can file for the final deed at a cost of $1.25 per acre." Vincent signed the necessary documents, listing both his and Katherine's names on the claim. "Is there a preacher or justice of the peace in town?" he asked as he completed the paperwork. "We'd like to be married." The clerk looked up in surprise, then smiled. "Reverend Thomas holds services every Sunday. He lives in the small house behind the church. I'm sure he'd be happy to perform a ceremony." They found Reverend Thomas working in his garden, a tall, thin man with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He listened to their request with evident pleasure. "It would be my honor," he said warmly. "We don't get many weddings in Pine Creek. When would you like to do this?" "Today, if possible," Vincent replied, squeezing Katherine's hand. "We've waited long enough." The Reverend chuckled. "Eager, I see. Well, my wife will want to make this a proper occasion. Why don't you return at sunset? That will give her time to bake a cake and gather some flowers." They spent the afternoon purchasing supplies in the town's small general store, tools for repairing the cabin, seeds for spring planting, flour, coffee, and other staples they would need. Katherine found a simple blue dress that would serve as her wedding gown, while Vincent purchased a new shirt and had his beard trimmed at the local barber. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they returned to the Reverend's home. Mrs. Thomas, a plump, cheerful woman, had indeed baked a cake and decorated their small parlor with wildflowers. She helped Katherine arrange her hair while the Reverend spoke privately with Vincent. "Are you sure about this, my dear?" Mrs. Thomas asked as she pinned a flower into Katherine's golden curls. "You seem to have known each other such a short time." Katherine smiled, meeting the older woman's eyes in the small mirror. "Some people find each other exactly when they're meant to. Vincent and I have been through more together in a few weeks than many couples face in years." Mrs. Thomas nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "Well, you certainly look at each other the right way. That's what matters in the end." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Standing before the Reverend in the flower-filled parlor, with only the Thomases as witnesses, Katherine and Vincent exchanged vows that held special significance given their pasts. "I promise to face whatever comes with you, to build our future together no matter what obstacles arise," Vincent said, his blue eyes never leaving Katherine's as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had purchased that afternoon from the general store's small selection. "I promise to trust in our tomorrow, to remember that the past has brought us here but does not define where we will go," Katherine responded, placing a matching band on Vincent's finger. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thomas concluded with evident satisfaction, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Vincent kissed her gently, his hands warm against her face. Katherine felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. They spent their wedding night in the town's small hotel, a luxury compared to the camping they had done for weeks. The next morning, they loaded their supplies and began the journey back to their claim, now officially their home. Over the following months, they worked tirelessly to transform the abandoned homestead into a working ranch. The cabin was repaired and expanded, the corral rebuilt. Vincent constructed a small barn while Katherine prepared ground for a garden. Word of the Pinkerton investigation into Ryan Rogers' activities reached them occasionally through newspapers or travelers passing through Pine Creek. Rogers had been arrested but released on bail, his trial delayed by legal maneuvering and the slow pace of territorial justice. "He's still dangerous," Vincent observed one evening as they sat on the porch of their completed cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. "And he has a long memory," Katherine nodded, her hand finding his. "But we're building something here that's stronger than his hatred. Something worth protecting." As winter settled over the valley, they found themselves well prepared for the harsh conditions. The cabin was snug, their supplies ample, and the companionship they shared made the long, cold nights pass pleasantly. They read books purchased from the general store, made plans for spring planting, and began to integrate themselves into the small community of Pine Creek, attending church services when weather permitted and participating in the occasional social gathering. Spring brought new beginnings. Katherine's garden flourished, Vincent acquired 2 promising maras to begin his breeding program, and the first 10 acres were successfully plowed and planted with wheat and corn. They added chickens as Katherine had dreamed, and later a milk cow purchased from a neighboring homestead. Summer passed in a blur of activity, tending crops, building fences, expanding their small herd. Autumn brought harvest and the satisfaction of seeing their hard work transformed into full storerooms and a sturdy home prepared for the coming winter. It was during this second winter that Katherine discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought joy tinged with concern. The nearest doctor was in the larger town of Clearwater, nearly 30 miles away. "We'll manage," Vincent assured her, his face alight with excitement despite his worries. "Mrs. Peterson in Pine Creek has delivered half the babies in the county, and will make arrangements to be in Clearwater when your time is close." As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, news arrived that sent ripples through their carefully constructed piece. Ryan Rogers had finally been convicted of land fraud and intimidation, sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. While this should have brought relief, Vincent received the news with wary caution. "His sons are still running the ranch," he pointed out, "and they're cut from the same cloth as their father." Nevertheless, the conviction allowed them to breathe a little easier, to focus more on their future and less on watching for danger from the past. When spring arrived again, Katherine's condition prevented her from working in the garden as she had planned, but neighbors from surrounding homesteads pitched in to help evidence of how the Harlows had become valued members of the community. Their daughter, Elizabeth Maria Harlow, was born on a warm June evening in the Clearwater doctor's home, with Vincent pacing anxiously in the adjoining room. When the doctor finally invited him in to meet his child, Vincent's hands trembled as he took the tiny bundle from Katherine's arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears filling his eyes as he gazed at the infant's delicate features. Just like her mother. Katherine watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. She's our future, Vincent. Everything we fought for. They brought Elizabeth home to the ranch when she was 2 weeks old. The cabin, once abandoned and broken, now stood as a testament to what could be built from ruins, a warm, welcoming home filled with love and the promise of tomorrow. As summer faded into fall, Vincent expanded the corral to accommodate the growing herd of horses that had become his pride. His expertise and training had become known throughout the region, bringing clients from as far as Clearwater to purchase his animals or seek his advice. Katherine, when not caring for Elizabeth, had established a small business selling preserves and baked goods to the general store in Pine Creek. Her garden had expanded to include medicinal herbs, and she had begun studying their properties with books ordered from back east. Their life was not without challenges: harsh weather, occasional crop failures, the ordinary difficulties of frontier existence, but they faced each obstacle together, their bond strengthening with each passing season. For years after they had first discovered the abandoned homestead, Vincent and Katherine stood on their porch watching 3-year-old Elizabeth chase butterflies in the flower garden that now surrounded their home. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and Vincent's pride, a stone fireplace that kept the main room warm even in the deepest winter. "I received a letter from Marshal Donnelly yesterday," Vincent said, his arm around Katherine's waist. "Ryan Rogers died in prison last month." Katherine looked up at her husband, searching his face for his reaction to this news. "How do you feel about that?" Vincent was silent for a moment, watching their daughter's joyful play. "Relieved," he finally admitted. "But also, I don't know, sad in a way. He spent his life building an empire through fear and intimidation, and died alone in a cell. What a waste of a life." Katherine nodded, understanding his complex feelings. "And his sons. According to Donnelly, they've sold most of the ranch holdings and moved to California," Vincent replied. "Apparently, they had no stomach for rebuilding what their father lost. A weight that had lingered even in their happiness seemed to lift from both their shoulders. The past, which had driven them together but also haunted their peace, was finally losing its power over their lives. "We did it," Katherine said softly. "We built a future stronger than our past." Vincent turned to her, his blue eyes as warm and compelling as they had been that first day in the Sweetwater stable. "No, my love, we're still building it. Every day." He kissed her gently, then more deeply as Elizabeth's attention remained focused on the butterflies. When they separated, both were smiling with the contentment of people who had found their place in the world with each other. "Mrs. Harlow," Vincent said with mock formality, "would you care to accompany me to the social at the church this Saturday? I hear they're planning a dance." Katherine laughed, the sound as free and joyful as their daughter's giggles. "I would be delighted, Mr. Harlow, though I warn you, my dancing skills may be rusty." "Mine too," Vincent admitted with a grin. "But I believe we've proven quite adept at learning new steps together." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting their valley in the same golden light that had first revealed its beauty to them, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From fugitives to farmers, from solitary survivors to a family, they had transformed not just the land around them but themselves as well. "I love you, Vincent Harlow," she said simply, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And I love you, Katherine Harlow," he replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the tomorrows we have left." Elizabeth ran to them then, her small hands clutching wildflowers she had gathered. "For you, Mama," she announced proudly, presenting her colorful bouquet. Katherine knelt to accept the gift, drawing her daughter into a warm embrace. Vincent joined them, his strong arms encircling the two most precious people in his world. Together they watched the sunset, a family built not from perfect circumstances but from the determined belief that the future could be brighter than the past, that love, once found, was worth fighting for, worth building upon, worth protecting with everything they had. And in that moment, with the last light of day gilding the home they had created together, Katherine and Vincent knew with absolute certainty that they had found what they had always been seeking, not just escape from what lay behind, but the courage to embrace what lay ahead. Their past had brought them together. Their love had given them a future, and that, perhaps, was the greatest redemption of all.